So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, guys, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So guys, before we start with the session, can you all please give me a quick confirmation if you all can see my screen and hear me loud and clear as well? Perfect. Thank you so much for the confirmation, everyone. So before we get started, guys, let me give you a small introduction about myself. So my name is Neeraj Kheria, and I have been working in this IT industry for more than 10 years now. So now let's get started. So the main agenda for today's session here would be we'll be discussing on AWS storage services. We'll see how what exactly is the what exactly storage service is offered by AWS. What is Amazon S3? What do we mean by buckets and objects? How we can take care of versioning and cross-region replication in S3. How we can take care of transfer acceleration, and then we'll see the S3 demo and its multiple use cases as a part of our hands-on. All right. First of all, let's get started on understanding the storage services offered by AWS, right? So AWS offers multiple storage services. Now, first of all, we have Elastic Block Storage, then we have File Storage, then we have Glacier, right? So here we have multiple storage services, and then we have Storage Gateway, and then we have S3. Here we have Storage Gateway, and then we have S3, right? Now, when we talk about block storage, now let's understand these one by one. If we talk about block storage, and block storage is basically useful for storing of multiple files as a block, right? Now, block storage will be obviously be used can be used for storing unformatted, or suppose we can say unprocessed or raw data, right? Where multiple data set are being stored as a complete block, right, in different regions, right? So that's why we can store these components as a block, right? File system are used for storing of files, like we said. Now let's suppose here we have multiple file system that we need on a frequent basis, right? Then we can use EFS for that. Then we can use EFS for storing those files which can be used, which we need on a frequent basis, right? Glacier is basically a service offered by Amazon, where Glacier is basically focused on storing archive files, right? That means those files which we do not need on a regular basis. For example, say if no, no, if a company has records for its financial records for suppose from 5 years back, right? So obviously company doesn't need those 5 years old financial data on a regular basis, correct? So that financial data may be required in years or any particular use case, especially in multiple years, right? That's why now this kind of data does not need to be accessed on a regular basis or not even months, right? So this can be stored as a part of Glacier service, where these data can be stored. Now, the cost of storing these data will be much lower in Vault because these are not accessed frequently, correct? And then we can store them in this in as a part of as a part of S3 Glacier. All right. Now, next we have storage gateways, right? Now, storage gateways are mostly used for when we are transferring files from our on-premise server. Suppose let's say we have on-premise server here, right? And let's suppose here we have 50 GB of data that needs to be transferred to AWS, right? So now, instead of transferring these files directly to AWS, right? So what we do have something called a storage gateway in between. It's again the main purpose of storage gateway is simply make sure the data is transferred smoothly and without any breaks and being uploaded to AWS servers here, right? And again here it contains multiple protocols, like we had TCP, we have multiple multiple switches and gates present here, so that it makes sure that the data is transferred smoothly from on-premise to AWS as a part of storage gateway. All right. And S3 is a part of the object storage that we have seen earlier, correct? Object storage is a part of the S3 is a part of the object storage, where we can store multiple files as a part of S3 storage that we'll be exploring step by step. All right, so now let's proceed further. Now let's understand what exactly is Amazon S3. What do we mean by Amazon S3 here, right? So S3 has a simple interface that we can use to store and retrieve files of any size at any time from anywhere, right? So whenever we want to store any kind of file, suppose we want to store documents, we want to host our static website, we want to store the backups, we want to store logs. So all of these things can be stored inside S3 and inside Amazon S3 storage, right? Now, when we talk about S3 simply means simple storage service. S3 is what? Simple storage service. Simple storage service as a service offered by AWS, right? So it contains three S, and that's why it has been abbreviated to S3, right? So that's why we have 3S here, and that's why we call it as Amazon S3 storage, simple storage service. Right, so now S3 can be used for storing any kind of data. It can be used for storing any kind of data. It is more durable. It is flexible. We can have now we can always available at any given point of time. Durable as in because here we can encrypt the data and make sure our data security is intact. Flexible because we can scale up and scale down the resource exactly as per exactly as required, right? And we can access the data anywhere from any time. It is available. That is, we can access the data at any point of time. So there's no restriction on the retrieval and storage of data that can be done at any point of time, right? It is cost efficient. That means obviously as compared to other providers for the block storage, it is much cost efficient as compared to the other one, right? Then it is highly scalable as well. It can meet the requirement for us. Suppose if we want to scale up the resources, if you want to scale down, that means if you want to increase the storage or decrease, then we can do that easily using S3, right? Again, it's more secure because of multiple encryption methods already put in place as a part of S3 storage. All right. Now in S3, we have multiple classes. We have standard, infrequent access, and Glacier, right? For example, now let's understand this in a much better way. And for understanding this, let's go back. Let's move to our Picasso mode. Let's move to our Picasso mode here. Now in storage options, we have three classes. In storage options, we have three classes here. We have standard, we have infrequent access called as IA, and then we have Glacier, right? So in standard class, what we do, we store all the files which we require on a frequent basis, right? For example, let's suppose when we are now, suppose if we have a website, right? If we have a website, now in that website, we are showcasing the gallery of the recent event. We are showcasing a gallery of the recent events here, right? Now these files needs to be accessed. These files needs to be shown to the users who are on the website on a regular basis, right? Since these are recent files, that means what we can do in the website, we can store all of these images as a part of standard class in S3, right? As a part of standard class in S3, right? Because this needs to be accessed. These needs to be accessed on a frequent basis. That's why we can store this in standard, because in standard, the data can be fetched quickly because it is available 99.99%, right? So the availability of these standards are really high, and it can be fetched within milliseconds as well. So if we do need to access these files, it can be fetched in milliseconds, and these are highly available, right? So all those files, now this can be PDF documents, this can be static files, this can be any kind of file, and there is no limitation as well there is no limitation in terms of the file that we can store as a part of a standard, right? And we can now in standard we can store files as low as, so there is no minimum requirement as well. That means we need to have files only for suppose 1 MB or so. We can store files as low as 1 KB as well, right? So you can store files as small as 1 KB as well, right? And all those frequent files that we need on a regular basis, that can be stored as a part of standard class. All right. Now next is we have infrequent access. Right? So in infrequent access, what we do, we simply store those kind of files which we do not need frequently, but if we need frequently, then it can be fetched quickly, right? For example, suppose here we are storing on, let's take the same example for gallery, right? Now this gallery is for 2019. So obviously this will be required to be fetched more frequently than any other classes, right? And here, suppose here we have a gallery for 2018 or 2018 or 17, right? Or 17 here. Now again, we have the images here stored, correct? Now these images are not that much in use, or they're not requested as high as 2019, correct? So what we can do, we can store these as a part of infrequent access, so that this can be stored in a separate class for infrequent access, right? Now this will not be, not the availability of these images will be 99.9%, right? Not 99, but 9%, right? But whenever we need to access these images, we can fetch them easily by using millisecond here, right? So this can help us in again making our entire storage more structured, correct? So these are not available as high as frequently as standard, but in any case, if we do need to fetch these data, then that can be done as quickly as possible as well. All right. And all of those files which are not required frequently, we can store these as a part of infrequent access here. All right. Now, and there's a limitation also available, guys. So in standard, there is no minimum duration for which we want to store the file, which we need to store the file for. We can store the file for suppose for 1 minute, and then we can remove it as well, right? But in infrequent access, there is a requirement. That means if we move the files to infrequent access, then we have to keep the file in infrequent access at least for 30 days, at least for 30 days, right? That means we can fetch the files, we can do that, but we cannot remove the files once we have moved them to infrequent access at least for 30 days, right? So that's a limitation for infrequent access. So now let's move to Glacier. Now in Glacier, let's say if we go back to Glacier here. Now, in Glacier, we can now, let's suppose here we have some files. Let's suppose if we have the files, now we may have seen this also in our practical example. Now, if we want to download our entire historical data from Facebook, right? If we want to download our entire history from on Google, right? Like from Google itself, right? Then when if we request the access of for downloading entire historical data, it simply says us, okay, we are preparing your entire historical data and it will be available within next few hours, right? So now what happens? Now, since these data are not required on a regular basis, so what we can do, we can store this as a part of Glacier, as a part of Glacier service, right? Where we do not need to fetch these data on a regular basis, correct? And that's why if now we can store this as a part of Glacier, right? So that now when we move something to Glacier, obviously here we can store files on a bigger volume, but the access will be much lower. For example, if we want to fetch something from Glacier, we have to wait at least for 4 hours. For 4 hours is a normal waiting period for fetching the files from Glacier back to our own storage, right? And there's a minimum duration for 90 days. That means if we move any files for Glacier service, then we have to store them at least for 90 days, right? And again, although we can increase the speed of fetching the data, but again, we have to pay for that particular fetch, right? We have to pay extra for increasing the speed of fetching process, right? And here again, we cannot store the files lower than in a standard. We had seen we can store files as low as small as 1 KB, correct? But again, there we have storage. We have limitations on the file storage as well, right? And here there are additional fees for every retrieval here. For example, here we have to pay fees per GB of retrieval, right? Suppose, let's say we are retrieving data for suppose 5 GB, right? Then there's a price attached to per GB of data that we can retrieve from the Glacier and as well as from infrequent access. All right. All right. So now let's remove our kindergarten drawing here. It looked like a kindergarten kid had drawn something. So now let's remove this and let's get right back. And as we have seen here, now the durability, each and every service is highly durable, but in terms of availability, here it is available 99.99% of time. Here it is the infrequent access is available 99.9% of time, and Glacier is not available because here we have to manually request the retrieval of data. That's why it is not available, right? Now here there is no limit on the, now in standard there is no limit on the minimum amount of size of file that we can have. In infrequent access, we need to have files as at least for 120 KB, right? And there's no limit for Glacier as well. Now, same way in terms of minimum storage duration, there's no minimum period required for standard, whereas for infrequent, we require to store the files for at least for 30 days, and in Glacier, we need to store them at least for 90 days, right? And again, first byte latency, that means in case we are trying to retrieve the files, it can be fetched in milliseconds, right? In infrequent and standard, but in Glacier, it is at least 4 hours, right? And there is no retrieval fee for standard, but there is a retrieval fee per GB for infrequent and for Glacier. All right. Now let's discuss on buckets and objects, right? So in S3, what we have here, we have multiple concepts of buckets, right? So bucket is simply, we can say, a storage bucket, right? Where we store multiple objects with their metadata as a part of bucket, right? So for example, so now here we can create multiple buckets. For example, here we can create multiple buckets here, right? So bucket, we can say it works like a container. Bucket here works like a container here, where all the media files, for example, let's suppose here we have audio files, here we have video files, here we have some PDFs, here we have suppose any website for the entire HTML files for the website, right? So all of these are referred as objects here, right? So bucket, we can say bucket is referred as a container which will house all the objects stored inside that particular container itself, on inside that bucket itself, right? And in one S3 storage, we can have multiple containers. We can have multiple buckets, right? So as a limitation here, now one account here is offered 100 buckets. That means we in one account we can have hundreds of buckets, and then we can have 20 buckets defined for one region as a part of a free account for AWS, right? So here we can have 20 different buckets, right, stored in a single region, right? And then each and every bucket can store its own type of files, right? Suppose, and here we can keep on storing multiple files exactly as per our requirement as a part of the bucket here, right? And each and every object also have its own metadata. Now, when we say metadata, it simply includes all the keys, all the versions, all the title, description, and every kind of metadata is also stored along with objects as a part of the bucket here. All right. So bucket here is unlimited, and again, when we are storing any kind of files, it cannot be greater than 5 TB, as we have seen here. So we cannot, that means we can have multiple buckets with unlimited size, right? And again, this object that we are storing here, for example, is suppose here we have a media file, right? Here we have a media file, or suppose if we are storing a backup here, right? Then the backup size cannot exceed 5 TB in total, right? So a single object cannot be greater than 5 TB in total as a part of S3, 5 TB here. So in AWS, we have 100, now we can have a total of 100 buckets, whereas in one region, we can have 20 buckets, right? So suppose in one region we have 20 buckets, in another region we have 5 buckets, suppose in another region in third region we have 8 buckets, right? So we can distribute them, but in total it will not be greater than 100 buckets in total. All right. All right. So now let's move forward. Now, next is we have versioning and cross-region replication. Okay, first of all, let's see, before we move to the versioning here, let's see how we can get started as a part of our hands-on on creation of multiple buckets and objects, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Now, first of all, we need to log into our console for AWS. So here we can log into our console. Let's do it. Now, for logging into console, we can simply type in login console.aws.com. So here we have to enter the MFA code for our account. Let's enter it. Now, once we log into our AWS, this will be the dashboard that we will be looking at. So now we can we can use the search bar. We can use the search bar here, or we can use the search bar available on top as well as a part of S3, right? As a part of services. So here we can search for service named as S3. So here we have S3 service available. And now this will take us to the simple storage service dashboard, where we can see the list of all the buckets that we already have in place here, right? So here we can see we have the list of all the buckets that we have already created, or in case we have no bucket created, or if we want to create a new bucket, then we can simply tap on this option which says create bucket, right? So let's click on it. Now, once you click on create bucket, first of all, here we have to define the bucket name, right? Suppose we want to call this bucket as Edureka. and sept. Okay, we cannot start the bucket name with any uppercases, right? So here we have Edureka September. So you can write the name as Edureka September. Now we have to choose a region in which we are deploying the bucket on, right? Now region selection is really important. Why? Because let's see. Suppose we have a user sitting in US, right? Suppose a user is sitting in US, and here we have users sitting in, suppose users who are based in UK, and then we have users who are based in, suppose, in India, and then we have users who are based in, suppose, in Australia, in AU, right? Now suppose if we deploy any bucket in US, right? If we have deployed any S3 bucket in US, then again it will be much easier for the US audience to access the data using this bucket than accessing the data in the bucket deployed in UK region, right? So again, if we have deployed a bucket in UK region, suppose now now US audience can be now they will be able to access the data stored in the bucket deployed in UK region, but the rate and the latency will be much higher, right? That means the time duration in which they need to the time that they need to access the data, to store the data, or to fetch the data will be much higher, correct? And that will slow down the performance, correct? And that's why it will be much better if they access the data stored in the own region itself, right? Same for Australia, same for India as well, right? So although they can be accessed to multiple regions, we can do that. That means US can also access the bucket for Australia. US can also access the bucket for India, but the performance will be much lower as compared to accessing data in their own region altogether, right? So we have to make sure that we create the bucket in that region which is closest to our users so that they can have a better performance. All right. So now let's assume on our hands-on creation of a bucket. So first of all, we have to go to the S3 service in our AWS console. Then here we can click on create bucket, and now we have to define the bucket name, and then we have to choose a region in which we are trying to deploy the bucket in, right? For example, suppose we are now here we can decide here we can choose between any of the regions. We can choose from Mumbai, Ireland, London. So in terms of regions, then we have 21 regions deployed globally by AWS in which we can choose from, right? For example, suppose we want to deploy this bucket in Mumbai region, we can choose Mumbai. Next, we can click on next here. Now, if we want, we can again keep all the settings by default. Now here we can decide if we want to block all the public access. Suppose if we want to make this entire bucket private, then we can keep it private. Or if we want to allow, or if we want to allow the access to the public for this bucket, then we can remove the public access from this part, right? Now, first of all, now here we can block all public access. Now in this option here, we can block the public access to buckets and objects granted to new access control list, right? Now here in AWS, we have a concept of ACL, right? So here we can define multiple ACLs. And again, if you don't want this to be accessed through new ACLs, now we already may have defined multiple ACLs before, but again, in terms of new ACLs, we don't want to give the access to, then we can uncheck, then we can check this option, right? If we want to block the access to our bucket through any of the ACL, then we can choose this option, right? Now, and third one is if we want to block the access to the bucket granted through new public bucket policies. Now here we have multiple policies that we can attach to any user or any group, right? Suppose if we want that any new user having a new policy attached to them, right? Now we don't want this bucket to be allowed to the access to those new users and new policies. Then we can attach it, right? And again, if we don't want this to be accessed by any user having any kind of public policies for bucket, then we can uncheck this one as well. Now, once we are done, then here we can review all the settings that we have done for the bucket. And now click on create bucket. So as you can see here, now we have the bucket created that we had deployed as a part of our S3 bucket, right? So here we have the bucket named as Edureka September, in which we can start uploading files, right? We can start adding files to our bucket that we have created. So now we can click on get started. And now we can start adding any files here. For example, let's click on add files. So now we can go ahead and choose any files here. Let's do that. Okay, let's say we do one thing. Let's upload our any of the files that we want to upload here. Let's suppose here we are trying to upload one particular file that we have, a small file that we have which contains a small application, right? Let's suppose we want to upload the zip file here, right? Next is we can define the ownership. That means the access that we want to grant to this particular user, right? Now here we have multiple storage classes that we have discussed, right? So if by default we have standard, and then we have three levels of infrequent access, right? So these are three levels of infrequent access. We have intelligent tiering, then we have standard IA, and then we have one zone IA, right? And then here we have multiple Glacier service, all right? And then we have multiple Glacier service. So if we want, we can choose between any of the classes here. Suppose if you want to start by standard, click on next, and now we can click on upload. Now, as you can see, as soon as we have clicked on upload, now the file is available as a part of bucket object here, right? So same way we can again here, if we want to create multiple folders, we can click on create folder. Suppose we want to name this folder as images, right? We can create images, click on save. Now we have folder for images, and now if we want to start adding images here, we can do that easily. So again, we can click on upload. We can click on add files, and now we can choose the images that we want to download here, right? Or images that we need to upload here. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's upload some pictures. Just a moment. Let's suppose here we have selected these three sample images here. We can click on next. And now we can choose the classes here, correct, as standard, and now we can click on upload, right? So now what we have, now we have these three images available that we can all and if we now as we had discussed, the object that is getting stored here, they all have their own complete metadata as well, right? So if we click on any of these objects that we have selected, here we can find the all the metadata. That means the current size, keys, the versions, the source, all of these things are already attached to the object that we have currently uploaded, right? And now if we want to share this part here, again, what we can do, we can simply make it public, right? And now we have the link available so that now we can share this link with anyone, and they'll be having the access to the image that we have currently uploaded, as you can see here, right? So now we can simply share this link with anyone, and now they can have the access to the file that we have shared with them. All right. Now let's do one thing. Let's say we upload the files for a sample website that we had as a sample dummy website, right? So let's do it. And for example, let's say we go back to our desktop. Now let's say we have a static website here, right? Suppose we have a static website, a static page for edureka.html, and we have navigation.png as well. And then we have multiple CSS folder for it as well. Now we can click on open, click on next, and now let's add this in the same standard class as a part of the bucket. Let's click on upload. So now as you can see here we have the standard HTML file with Edureka with navigation.png also available, right? Now let's do one thing. Let's make some changes in this HTML file. Let's do that. Let's go back to our folder. Let's make some changes for this Edureka file in our HTML. As you can see here we have a simple file, right? So here we have dummy website that we have created as a part of our as a dummy website, right? And now let's suppose we do one thing. We do make some changes in this file. Let's say we add another. Suppose let's say we add one thing else. Let's suppose we add any particular paragraph. For example, sample paragraph, right? We have a small change. Now let's do one thing. Now let's upload the file back to our AWS, to our S3 bucket, right? Again, we can click on upload. Now, as you can see here, we have the file already available. Now we have made some changes, and now we are uploading the same file again, right? Add files. Again, we can save the file. As you can see now, this is currently updated, right? So we can upload this file, click on next, the same class as standard, and now upload. Okay, why this will not work? Because first of all, we have missed on enabling version first, right? So first of all, before we can maintain versions, we do have to make sure that we enable versioning in our bucket, right? So what now, how to do that? First of all, you have to go to properties. Now in properties, we have a, now here we have a property enabled here, right? So here you have a property named as versioning, right? So we have to open this up, and now here we can click on enable versioning, correct? So now if we click on enable versioning, then save. Now remember, we have to enable versioning for keeping the record of the versions in this bucket, right? Without this, versions will not be maintained. All right, guys. So here we can enable versioning in the properties tab. Once we have enabled this, now we can come back to overview. And now let's make the same change again. Now suppose again, if we go back, if we add, suppose again, another paragraph, right? We are learning S3 storage, or just S3. We save it. Now let's go ahead and upload the same file. It is currently updated. And now click on next. We choose the same class and now upload. Now as you can see here, now this file has been uploaded, has been updated, right? And now if we want to see the previous file, the previous version of the same file that we had uploaded, for seeing that, what we can do here, we on top we have an option called as versions, right? So after we enable version, we'll be seeing this option as a part of our S3 bucket, right? So to see the previous version, we can simply click on show, right? And as you can see here, now we had two versions of HTML, Edureka.html, and then we can see this as a version. So this is the latest version, and this is a previous version that we had uploaded. All right. Now, let's suppose if we have to host a static website, then what we have to do, we have to go to back here in properties, we have to enable something called as static website hosting, right? So we have now this will enable us to host any static website. Again, not dynamic, but static website in S3 bucket, right? So here we can click on use this bucket to host a website. Now here we have to define the index document. When we say index document, we simply mean the root file, or we can say the home page, right? For example, in our S3 bucket, we had uploaded 10 files. We had uploaded 10 files there, right? Now suppose we have 10 HTML files. Now which file will be treated like a home page, right? That page has to be defined as an index document, right? So currently, suppose if we want edureka.html to be treated like a home page, right? Then we can mention this as index document, correct? Error document is just like we have 404 pages, right? Suppose and if any error happens, then which page should be treated like a 404 page? Then we can define here. Currently, we don't know, we don't have that page created. Then again, if we would have, then we could have mentioned this, right? Suppose if we did have a page called 404.html, then we could have added this as an error document, right? And now click on save. So now what we have done, now we have enabled static website hosting as a part of our S3 bucket, right? And now we can combine this with another service that is Cloudfront. So now what we can do, now once we have this one created, now we can go back to our versions here. Now suppose here we have the website here, right? Here we have the website. So now if we want to see this website in live preview, what we can see here, here we can click on the file, and now we have the static website being deployed, right? As a part of S3 storage here, as a part of S3 storage here, right? And if we want to see the again, if we want to deploy this, this website using a temporary URL offered by AWS, then we have another service. Which is called as Cloudfront, right? So here we can look for the service named as Cloudfront, here, right? So Cloudfront is basically a content delivery network offered by AWS. So here let us open that. And again, if you want, we can click on create distribution, get started. Now here we can choose the default name. Now here it will be the same. Now here it will be the bucket in that we have created, right? So we had the bucket in as Edureka September 3, right? And now we can now we simply have to choose the default bucket name. Everything else will remain same. We don't have to worry about changing these things as we'll be discussing these things when we start our journey on AWS, right? So once we are done, we can simply scroll down and click on create distribution, right? So as you can see here, it may take some time to deploy this, but once we have this one deployed here, right, then we'll be getting the URL. As you can see, then we'll be getting the domain name, And whichever, now if we want to share this with anyone, we can simply share this domain name and which will be hosting our static website. Correct? So currently this is currently being deployed. That's why it is not visible. But again, once we deploy this, this will be our static website. And this will be opening up the same HTML page that we had defined as a static page for our website. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.